On February 2, 2014, during the Super Bowl, a company bought 30 seconds of the most expensive advertising airtime in the world to tell 112 million people that its own stores were a joke. The commercial opens on a bored clerk answering the phone. He looks at his coworker and says, "The 80s called. They want their store back." Then the doors burst open and the 80s walk in. Wrestlers, a horror movie doll, a DeLorean, a wall of cassette players and rabbit ear antennas, all of it swept out the door in one triumphant montage, ending on a bright, modern, remodeled store. Critics loved it. Ad columnists called it one of the sharpest self-aware spots of the year. For one night, it looked like the smartest joke a struggling company had ever told about itself. The company was RadioShack, and it was not lying. Its stores really did look frozen in 1985. Its brand really was a punchline. The problem is that knowing exactly what is wrong with you is not the same thing as being able to fix it. Exactly 1 year later, to the day, February 2, 2015, RadioShack was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. 3 days after that, it filed for bankruptcy. This is the story of a company that saw its own death coming clearly enough to put it in a Super Bowl commercial, and still could not stop it, because the thing that was actually killing it was never the decor. RadioShack began in 1921 in Boston, a small mail-order business selling equipment to amateur radio operators and electronics hobbyists, the kind of people who built their own gear from schematics in magazines. By the early 1960s, it was nearly dead, carrying a loss of $4 million, on the edge of closing for good. It was bought that year by a Texas leather goods company. Tandy Corporation had spent decades selling shoe leather and hobby kits to Boy Scouts, run by a former Navy supply officer named Charles Tandy, who had a talent for turning slow, sleepy retail chains into disciplined, profitable ones. Tandy stripped RadioShack's inventory down to whatever sold fastest and made the most money per item. He tied every store manager's bonus directly to that store's revenue, so managers behaved like owners because, in a real sense, they were being paid like owners. And he built one habit into every single transaction, no matter how small. Buy a 9-volt battery, and the clerk was required to ask for your name, your address, your phone number, before ringing you up. It was there from the very beginning, decades before anyone used the phrase, "Data is the new oil." Customers grumbled about it constantly. It also worked. Within 2 years, the $4 million loss was a profit. Tandy had found something most retailers never find: a chain built on genuine technical trust between the person behind the counter and the person buying the parts, and a business model precise enough to squeeze a profit out of a single resistor. In 1977, RadioShack did something almost no other retailer in America had done. It put a fully assembled computer on a shelf. At the time, if you wanted a personal computer, you usually bought a kit of loose parts and soldered it together yourself, waiting weeks for mail-order components. RadioShack's TRS-80 came in a box, ready to plug in, for $600. It sold faster than anyone at the company expected, and for a moment, RadioShack was not just an electronics store. It was one of the companies that put a working computer into an ordinary American living room for the first time, ahead of most people who had ever heard the name Apple. That single bet on being first, being useful, being trusted with something genuinely new, became the engine of 2 more decades of growth. RadioShack rode that trust into a physical footprint no retailer before or since has quite matched. By 1999, RadioShack had passed 8,000 stores across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The company's own internal estimate, repeated in its annual reports and confirmed independently by outside press at the time, was staggering. 94% of Americans lived or worked within 5 minutes of a RadioShack. Not a RadioShack in their city. 5 minutes. It had become something close to physical infrastructure, as ordinary and unremarkable as a mailbox or a gas station, sitting in strip malls in towns most other national retailers never bothered to reach. The company that had once been $4 million from bankruptcy now touched more American households, more directly and more often than almost any retailer alive. But 5 minutes from everyone is also a trap, if the thing you sell stops being special. Around the year 2000, the company dropped the Tandy name entirely and became simply RadioShack Corporation. And with that name change came a quiet identity shift that would define everything after it. The parts drawers, the resistors, the hobbyist counter staff who actually understood circuits, all of it slowly gave way to a much simpler business, selling cell phones and accessories, chasing whatever consumer gadget was popular that quarter. It was a reasonable bet on paper. It was also a bet that RadioShack could outcompete dedicated phone carriers and big box electronics chains at their own specialty, using stores that averaged barely 2,500 square feet, a fraction the size of a Best Buy. The company that had once been the only place in town that actually understood what it was selling became, in the eyes of its own customers, one more forgettable place to buy a phone case. An independent research firm ranked RadioShack the worst overall customer experience of any retailer in America, and it held that rank for 6 consecutive years. Not a bad year. 6 years running, worst in the country. While the company kept opening more of the same small, understocked stores in the same strip malls, betting that convenience alone could substitute for the trust it had spent 40 years building and was now quietly giving away. Here is the mechanism that actually killed RadioShack, and it has almost nothing to do with cell phones or the internet. Between 2000 and 2011, the company spent $2.6 billion buying back its own stock, trying to prop up a share price that fell anyway, from over $24 down to $2.53. That was capital that never went into fixing a single store. By 2013, RadioShack was bleeding money so badly it needed a rescue loan just to keep operating. $250 million from Salus Capital and Cerberus Capital Management. The loan came with a condition buried in the fine print. RadioShack was legally forbidden from closing more than 200 stores a year. The lenders wanted those store leases and that inventory intact as collateral in case they ever needed to seize it. So when RadioShack's own leadership finally admitted the obvious, that the company was carrying 1,100 stores that were losing money and needed to close immediately, they could not do it. The rescue loan that was supposed to buy the company time to save itself had legally chained it to its own worst locations. RadioShack spent 2014 telling the public it knew exactly what was wrong, on television, in interviews, in its own financial filings, while remaining contractually unable to fix it. It would take an actual bankruptcy filing, not a rescue plan, to legally free the company to close its own stores. By then, it was already the end. While RadioShack was legally frozen in place, the ground underneath it was disappearing entirely. Every single category the company had ever built its business on, calculators, portable radios, GPS units, camcorders, walkie-talkies, answering machines, was quietly folding itself into a single object that most Americans now carried in their pocket. You no longer needed a RadioShack for a dozen different gadgets, because one smartphone had already replaced all of them, and you could order the one thing you still needed, a cable or a specific part, from Amazon and have it arrive in 2 days, cheaper, without driving anywhere. RadioShack had built an empire on being 5 minutes away from everyone. That advantage evaporated the moment the nearest store was inside everyone's own pocket. The company tried to adapt by leaning harder into wireless phone sales, at one point exploring a deal to co-brand thousands of stores with Sprint. Hoping a mobile carrier's foot traffic could save the real estate, the loan covenant would not let it close. It was a patch on a wound that had already gone septic. 9 straight quarters of falling sales, 10 consecutive quarterly losses, a stock price that slid below $1 in the summer of 2014, triggering a formal delisting warning from the exchange itself. The company that had once needed a calculator to count how fast it was growing now needed one to count how many quarters it had left. On February 2nd, 2015, exactly 1 year after the Super Bowl commercial that had promised a new RadioShack, the company was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. 3 days later, on February 5th, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and the very first thing it did, the thing it had been legally forbidden from doing for 2 years, was publish a list of 1,784 stores to close immediately. One analyst at AllianceBernstein put it bluntly to reporters at the time, "RadioShack died years ago," he said. "We are only now holding the funeral." Then came the detail that stung longtime customers the most. As part of the bankruptcy sale, RadioShack listed the personal information of 67 million customers as a company asset, up for sale to the highest bidder, despite decades of promising that data collected at the register would never be sold. The Federal Trade Commission and attorneys general from 38 states fought the sale in court. It was eventually approved anyway, in a smaller, restricted form. The exact ritual Charles Tandy had built into every RadioShack transaction since 1963. The name, the address, the phone number, taken in exchange for trust and good service, ended its life as a line item in a bankruptcy auction. A hedge fund bought the brand and roughly 1,700 stores for $26 million. 2 years later, in March of 2017, that new owner filed for bankruptcy again, and RadioShack closed nearly all of its remaining physical stores for good. A dead retail brand is not always allowed to stay dead. In 2020, a Florida holding company called Retail E-Commerce Ventures bought the RadioShack name, along with other faded brands like Pier 1 Imports and Linens and Things, run by internet personality and investor Ty Lopez alongside co-founder Alex Mayer. Their pitch was that these old names still carried decades of built-up customer trust, and that trust alone could power a new online-only version of each brand. To some observers, it looked like an unlikely, almost inspiring second act for a store people had grown up with. In December 2021, the company launched a cryptocurrency trading platform under the RadioShack name. The following year, the official RadioShack Twitter account, run by the company's own chief marketing officer, began posting sexually explicit content to draw attention to it, a decision that cost RadioShack a long-time dealer partnership within days. Then, in September 2025, the Securities and Exchange Commission filed federal fraud charges against Lopez, Mayer, and the company's chief operating officer. The SEC alleges the trio raised roughly $112 million from hundreds of investors across RadioShack and its sister brands, using Ponzi-like payments funded by newer investors to make the returns look real, while misappropriating over $16 million for personal use. These are charges, not a conviction. But the shape of the story is hard to miss. The exact commodity RadioShack had spent decades earning at the cash register, the trust of ordinary people, was, according to federal prosecutors, being sold one more time. The strangest part of RadioShack's story is not that it failed to see the end coming. It saw the end coming with unusual clarity. It put its own outdatedness into a national commercial and let 112 million people laugh along. Its own analysts said its funeral was overdue before it even happened, and still none of that clarity mattered, because clarity was never RadioShack's problem. The problem was a decade of stock buybacks that could have modernized its stores instead of its share price. The problem was a rescue loan that legally forbade the company from cutting the very stores it needed to cut. The problem was an identity built over decades on genuine technical trust that had been slowly traded away for cell phone commissions and forgettable strip mall real estate until there was nothing distinctive left to save. Knowing you are dying is not the same as having the freedom to act on it. RadioShack diagnosed itself correctly on the biggest stage in American advertising, 1 full year before it happened, and it still could not change course in time. That gap between knowing and being able to act is where most declining companies actually die, not from ignorance. From constraints they built for themselves, one contract and one strategic shortcut at a time, long before anyone was paying attention. And even after the stores closed, the name kept being used to promise people something it could no longer deliver. If you want more stories like this, about the exact moment an empire's own strength quietly became its cage, subscribe to Toppled Empires. We tell one of these every week. And if you already knew about that Super Bowl ad, tell us in the comments, because most people forget it happened exactly 1 year before the end.